I don't think anybody foresaw what Queen would become when they started. They were a pop group who dressed in funny clothes, but they were a bloody good pop group.
Innovative, exciting, different, and what turned out to be one of the best live bands ever.
They were unusual looking, they were memorable, they had the big sound. They were an arena band from the start. They were kind of like the arena rock Beatles in a way. They had that eclecticism.
What Queen did has always been supremely legitimate. And I mean, it's just gone from strength to strength.
It was a brave new world they kind of developed. You can say it was part of the glam thing from England, but it wasn't. It was its own thing.
The unique thing about Queen, which is all four of them wrote, and all four of them are responsible for hit songs. All four.
What impressed me about Brian was not the gimmicks, it's just the fact that he could play. He just had a beautiful, beautiful noise on his guitar.
He built a really nice guitar, and he played like he was in an orchestra, I thought.
Roger was great because he'd have this way of playing so that he'd suddenly stand up on his bass drum and thump the bass drum, hit the cymbal, and at the same time grab the cymbals to deaden it. And I mean, Brian and I had never seen anything like this.
I think John Deacon was quite an intense person, really interested in his music. On stage, very much as off stage.
Freddie used the stage. He was a larger-than-life character.
Freddie was great. Everybody used to say, "Here comes the star." He treated himself like a star, and in the end, the whole world treated him like one.
Freddie always had great dignity. He didn't go about in public at the end. And I think that dignity carried on to other people in a similar situation, who then thought, well, okay, you know, I too can handle it and be dignified.
Who can we get to replace Freddie Mercury? Well, you can't. You know, there is the irreplaceable.
I don't think anything will replace Freddie Mercury. He was a legend, absolutely amazing.
Queen is cool.
By embracing the exaggerated spectacle of glam rock and mixing it with a hearty dose of English vaudeville, Queen created an over-the-top, operatic hard rock sound. One of the most dynamic and charismatic frontmen in rock, Freddie Mercury brought a sparkling extravagance to the band. Through his legendary performances and the inventive musical stylings of the band, Queen became one of the most popular rock acts in the world.
They were all academics to one extent or another, all well studied.
All of them. They're very good. They're all incredibly well educated. All four of them are college educated guys. And in fact, Brian has a master's degree. A lot of people don't realize that.
My family are all fairly academic, and if you weren't something respectable, you were a bad thing.
Brian Harold May was born in Feltham, Middlesex on July 19, 1947. His father, Harold May, was an electronics engineer as well as a competent musician.
My father plays ukulele banjo, like a ukulele except it's got the banjo at the bottom, yeah. And he taught me a few chords on that. The first time I remember being interested in guitars was seeing a film about Tommy Steele. He was a big star in England.
Tommy, you've written hit songs and had hit records.
Oh yes, many of those. My true love. And when I'd seen Tommy Steele, I said, oh, I must have a guitar.
And indeed, Brian acquired that prized instrument, a Spanish acoustic, for his 7th birthday. He quickly taught himself how to play, expanding upon the rudimentary chords he had learned on the ukulele. In 1958, Brian earned a scholarship to Hampton Grammar School. While at school, he drew closer to those students who dabbled in music.
We used to play in the lunch hours when I was at grammar school, and we had a kind of guitar club which we started. We were regarded as eccentrics at the time. It was sort of something that was looked down upon very much.
I was intensely jealous of some of the other boys in my class, and some of them were out playing for money and actually doing it seriously, sort of semi-professionally at that time. There was a group called The Others, who were very good for their time.
He wanted to get in the school group, The Others, and he was just too young, and they wouldn't have him in. So maybe that was an early bitter pill. Maybe that helped in a bizarre way to maintain his balance. I don't think so. He's just a nice guy.
Brian's increased interest in guitar playing eventually compelled him to create his own instrument.
At that time, some of my friends were buying electric guitars, the cheaper kind, which I didn't really like. So I was beginning to get an idea of the sort of guitar I wanted. And that's when I started thinking about making one.
Brian had made his guitar from a wardrobe and a fireplace. I was certainly full of awe for that alone, and I hadn't even seen the guitar then. And when I did see the guitar, I really couldn't believe the quality of the finish. Very fine piece of work for a teenager.
The guitar had its own unique sound, and its craftsmanship made it a far superior instrument to his friends' commercially made guitars. After gaining experience playing with several local bands, Brian met vocalist Tim Staffel at Hampton Grammar School.
Brian was about a year older than me. It was kind of a it was kind of a formal establishment, but it was at the beginning of the rock and roll era, so in England. And I guess it was quite natural that the musicians, or the embryonic musicians within the environment, would gravitate together, and it just so happened that Brian and I became good mates. And that's when the band 1984 evolved.
Borrowing the name 1984 from the then futuristic George Orwell novel, the group played their first gig in 1964. Brian's homemade guitar, the Red Special, was an integral part of their look and sound.
Wow, it was always there. I mean, it was tremendous. He'd got that way of being able to reverse the polarity on all of the pickups and have endless combinations, which you couldn't do on a Fender. I mean, in those days, Fender Stratocasters had 3-position switches, you know. So it was actually really rather an innovative machine electronically, even in those days. And that obviously contributed to the sound.
Even at the beginning, Brian had a unique style. Obviously hadn't developed as much as it would later on. And he was always striving. He was always looking for the extra inch, the extra mile, the extra little bit of musical quality he could put into his music.
Brian left Hampton Grammar School with high marks, and in the autumn of 1965, he began studying astronomy at Imperial College in London.
Brian's thesis was on the movement of interplanetary dust.
Brian was always a very studious person. He was studying science at university, but also very interested in music. Whatever he did to the limit, really. If he wanted to do something, he wanted to do it very, very well.
Although the members of 1984 had since left grammar school, they kept in touch, joining up for any gigs they could land.
We were fairly successful in terms of the fact that we used to play maybe every other Saturday night, and we'd make money. We'd make a few pounds each. There was a big thing at Olympia in '67, which had loads and loads of bands. It was Jimi Hendrix, Pink Floyd, Traffic, The Animals, big all-night thing. 1984 were the last band on at about 6 o'clock in the morning. We were hanging in rags. Man, we got dressed up in, our manager bought us velvets, and those days we were wearing the guardsman's jackets. We looked terrible. Makeup, oh man. But Hendrix was on the same bill, and we were on the same stage as Hendrix. Everyone in this place was lying around going, oh no, you know, drunk and stoned and God knows what, and we bounced on.
Conflicting ideas over musical direction, as well as the amount of time Brian was spending on his education, contributed to the breakup of 1984.
When we all left to go our separate ways and we went on to college, Brian went to Imperial, I went to Ealing to study art, and which is the evolution of Smile. Of course, when I went to Ealing, one of the people I met and became close friends with was Freddie. So the kind of the mesh was beginning to form.
Farrokh Bulsara was born September 5, 1946, on the East African island of Zanzibar. In the summer of 1955, when he was 8 and a half, Farrokh's parents sent him to an Indian boarding school outside of Bombay. Here, his friends began to call him Freddie, and the name stuck. In 1964, dangerous civil unrest in Zanzibar forced the Bulsara family to move to England. They settled in Brian May's hometown of Feltham, where Freddie began to study art.
What happens is you start to gravitate towards people within the group that are closest to you in style and in kind of general demeanour. And, well, it probably wasn't overtly because of music, but Freddie and I
pretty soon became friends with maybe another 2 or 3 people because we just had similar interests. And Hendrix was a cohesive factor in those years. Music was a terrifically cohesive factor.
While becoming friends with Freddie, Tim also stayed in touch with Brian May. They missed making music together and decided to find a drummer to jam with.
It was a scribbled postcard pinned to the notice board in the Students' Union at Imperial College.
The note announced that they were looking for a Mitch Mitchell / Ginger Baker type drummer. One of the first to reply was Roger Taylor.
He came down for a blow at one of the flats we were at. I don't think we heard anybody else because he's so flamboyant and so good that we said, okay, you're hired. Yeah. He was great. I mean, Roger was great.
Roger Meadows Taylor was born in Kings Lynn, Norfolk, on July 26, 1949. He had an early interest in music and dabbled with the guitar, but it became evident that he belonged behind a drum set when he got one for Christmas in 1961.
I think Roger always had one ambition and one ambition only, really, which was to be a rock star, to live the rock star life. He really enjoyed being the rock star.
I mean, I've been playing since I was 13 in earning money in bands, you know, which is quite a long time now.
Roger had been in a band in Truro, which was his hometown way over in the West Country.
Johnny Quayle and The Reaction played consistently, but suddenly Johnny Quayle decided to leave just before they were to play a gig. Roger was the only one in the band who could sing, and he quickly filled in. His ability to sing and play drums at the same time was impressive, and the band became known as Reaction. With his college years beckoning, Roger pulled up stakes and moved to London to pursue his music career. Reaction soon fell apart.
I went to a medical college at first to study dentistry, and then I changed to a different college to do biology degree. It was just a method of getting to London, to the big city, to start off.
When he came up to London, he really wanted to get back into the music scene, and eventually he met up with Tim and Brian, and they formed the group called Smile.
I have to contrast myself with Roger and Brian in Smile, and Brian certainly was a kind of iconic figure. Tall guy with a fabulous guitar, and Roger the flamboyant drummer.
They were an astonishing three-piece because to find a three-piece where every member is a top-line vocalist is very, very rare, and a very tight three-piece at that. So they were a very powerful unit.
And I think there were some of the beginnings of Queen, as it were, in those early vocals, in those early harmonies between Roger and Brian.
We used to like vocal harmonies. I mean, that was an aspiration for us. We kind of wanted to include harmonies within our thing. We wanted to, because there were so many rock trios who didn't employ, you know, they just went for the burn. And we wanted to kind of be an intelligent, songwriting, heavy band. I mean, I guess that's kind of a blueprint for Queen, really.
Our original sort of dream, whether it was very well defined in our heads at the time or not, was a heavy sort of rock group, but with harmonies which could even get over the top of the heaviness.
Smile spent the autumn months rehearsing and playing a variety of cover tunes.
We liked rock rhythms. We liked, you know, the heavy drums, the power bass rather than the intricate bass. I was a power rock bass player. And in 1984 there was a rhythm guitarist as well. So Brian's sound, which was evolving in the 1984 years, always had a rhythm guitar to back it up. So he was kind of honing his lightning lead technique in those days. And when we moved into Smile, it became incumbent upon him to develop a chordal backup, which he did fantastically. You listen to Queen and you don't feel that there's anything missing. You don't feel that it's light at all, which you might otherwise expect if you consider that there's only one guitar. I think that probably developed out of the necessity in Smile to do the two jobs, to be rhythm and lead at the same time, integrate the two together.
Smile made its first public appearance in support of Pink Floyd at Imperial College on October 26, 1968.
We were pretty stunned at that, as I was. The oil slides and the projections. I mean, we tried to play a conventional heavy rock set, and then on came the Floyd. What?
Smile's audience was very much based around London university colleges, certainly to start with. They had very big ties with Imperial College, part of London University, and they quite often did gigs there. They became a very popular band on the university circuit.
Smile played so many dates at the college that they became known as the Imperial College Band.
They were so easy in each other's company and so easy with the music that they were playing that they improvised quite a lot on stage. Freddie was a friend of Tim's and used to come along to the early Smile concerts. He used to follow the band around.
Freddie joined a couple of bands at the same time, and there was kind of a friendly rivalry between us, and he used to come to our gigs and occasionally I'd go to theirs.
He was always being constructive with Smile. He was always offering ideas. I think he wanted them to be a little bit more flamboyant. He wanted a bit more stage presence. He wanted a bit more moving around on the stage. But that wasn't really Smile's style.
That was the point when he was beginning to comprehend the requirement for a theatrical presence and the requirement for a stage persona, and slowly developing it. It was coming out in flashes, but you know, it wasn't that apparent. But vocally, certainly, I mean, it was pretty apparent to me that his vocals were getting stronger and stronger and stronger.
We were celebrating a birthday in a pub in Kensington, and it turned out that those guys were Tim Staffel, Brian May, and Roger Taylor. And they had a chum with them, a friend who wasn't part of their band, which was Smile. And he was Freddie, and he was a singer looking for a band. And we were a three-piece without a front singer.
So Freddie was hanging around trying to persuade Smile that what they needed was him as a vocalist, and they were three great singers. When he realised he wasn't getting anywhere with them, he turned his attention to us, three naive young lads from up north, and within about 5 minutes he persuaded us that we definitely needed him, so he joined us.
I think it was Freddie that pointed it out.
Yeah, we thought we were great singers till he pointed out to us that what we really needed was a front man and a vocalist, and we went, yeah, all right.
Although intent on becoming a member of Smile, Freddie saw an opportunity with Ibex and joined the band.
We came down from the north and we were playing blues, basically, which is, it's 12-bar stuff, no key changes. It's in a couple of very easy keys on the guitar. And Freddie said, no, when you're writing songs, you've got to use the black notes. We'd be writing songs together and he'd say, okay, what we need now is a key change. And I go, what do you need a key change for? He says, because it makes it more interesting. And I said, ooh, interesting songs, never thought about that one. So he kind of introduced us at key changes and tempo changes and stuff like that. So I learned loads of stuff off him because we just knew about blues, but he took us way beyond that.
And his record collection, small though it was, I think he only had about 12 albums. But I think it spoke volumes about where he was coming from. There were the few Zeppelin albums, the Beatles' White Album, and he also had a few Who albums, including Who Sell Out and Tommy.
One of my very first recollections of Freddie was when he turned up at the flat in Shepherd's Bush that members of the band used to share. He brought with him a copy of Who's rock opera, Tommy, and he played it, and he listened to it, and he listened to it with great intensity. He studied it. He couldn't believe it would have been possible to produce a piece of music like that from a rock band. And I think that was the first inklings, really, of his intensity in music. I could see then that he was very ambitious about music. He wanted to push music as far as it could go.
I think the difference was that we knew where music was, but he knew where it was going.
He did introduce a visual dynamic straight away.
Before we were a three-piece, and one of us would sing and the others would stand back in amazement. In fact, we'd stand still and look at the stage, look at the floor. Very cool. It was all about the sound. What Freddie introduced was a very visual element. He could jump around. He didn't have anything to concentrate on playing. That was a bit of a shock to the system at first, because like if you're used to playing guitar solos with your eyes shut, you're giving it all this, you go, that's a guy on his knees or whatever, holding the mic up to your guitar, and you go, where'd that come from, It's good, once you got into his way of thinking, you could kind of, it's a bit of a culture shock, really, sort of Kensington fashion type person meets young guys from the north. Culture shock?
Somewhat.
Yeah, but, yeah.
Bieber was the fashion house of the 60s in London, which was based on Kensington High Street, which just happened to be diametrically opposite Kensington Market. And Kensington Market was just lots of little stalls selling the fashionable items of the day. Freddie and Roger set themselves up a little later on as what they described as gentlemen's outfitters.
Kensington Market, where Roger and Freddie worked for quite some time, was a very strange place. It had a very bohemian atmosphere. It wasn't the sort of place you really went to work. It was a place you went to meet friends, to enjoy life, to see what fashion was around.
The common denominator was the clothes, the stars, the glitter. I mean, there was, you know, Gary Glitter, Sweet, David Bowie, Mark Bolan. And I think that Freddie was probably enamoured of all that glam and glitter period because, as a lot of young boys did then, liked dressing up. We all went to parties and everyone put a bit of makeup on. Suddenly you weren't gay for putting a bit of makeup on. Suddenly you could go to a party with a few stars on your face and some eyeliner, a bit of mascara, and it was cool, and the girls said, wow, he's really cool, that guy. Whereas 2 years before, you wouldn't have been cool. The girls wouldn't have looked at you twice.
I learned a lot of things from Freddie. One was that it's always possible to get where you're going nicely, yeah? And we all loved the name Ibex because we thought of it. Didn't mean anything. I know it's a small furry animal or something, kind of goat. It didn't mean anything, we just thought it was a kind of wacky name. And Freddie hated it. He could see instantly that nobody's ever going to get anywhere being in a band called Ibex. So he wanted to change it to Wreckage. So I got a call about 11 o'clock one night from Freddie, and he said, Mike, I've been talking to the others, and they don't mind if we change the name to Wreckage. Do you mind? And I said, no. Not really, you know, not if everybody else doesn't mind. So the next rehearsal we turned up to, which was 24 hours later, all the gear had been stenciled Wreckage. You know, Ibex had been painted out, not been stenciled Wreckage. And in a coffee break later on, we all discovered that we'd all had exactly the same phone conversation. Freddie stenciled the stuff a week before he asked any of us, and then phoned us all up and asked us if we didn't mind.
Meanwhile, Smile attracted the interest of American record producer Lou Reisner, who signed the band to record a single for Mercury Records. The result was the single Earth, which found release only in the United States. It was a major flop. Not surprisingly, the record label's UK division refused to have anything to do with it. Smile dutifully recorded more material in hopes of creating a full-length album. But their record deal blew up in their face, and with dreams shattered, Smile was released from the label.
We've been so frustrated with this group called Smile. We'd made a record which was supposedly released in America, but it couldn't have sold anything at all. We never got any royalties or anything. And we had bad experiences with managers and with agents. The whole thing, we were just kind of at the wrong end of everything.
The longer it went on, the more any kind of evidence of success eluded me, the more insecure I felt. I mean, if we were playing away somewhere and we were staying somewhere, I'd frequently sit in a hotel room looking out at the rain thinking, geez, what am I doing here? When I left to move on musically, but all I was really doing was extending the envelope.
Brian and I used to share a place in London, and Freddie used to drop by all the time, sleep on the sofa. And we just got better and better friends, and then in the end we decided, Brian and I had another band, and that broke up. And we decided, well, it seems to be the obvious thing to start one up with Freddie.
Freddie agreed and quickly left Wreckage to join forces with Brian and Roger.
From the first day we'd met Freddie and the members of Smile, it's always seemed entirely appropriate that Freddie should be in their band, and he wasn't.
Freddie moved into the gap. It was natural. I mean, the bands that he were playing with were possibly less established than Smile was. And Freddie was the obvious choice for Brian and Roger to approach.
He was determined it was going to happen, you know, one way or the other. And if he couldn't make it happen with us, he'd make it happen with someone. And he did.
Once Freddie arrived and started working with Brian on the new music, on the new sounds, the whole thing really gelled together.
Serendipity, you know, I mean, it was the right thing.
I think what you've got with Queen is the Lennon and McCartney, the Buckingham Nicks, the Townsend Daltrey. You've got that, the two people in Freddie Mercury and Brian May who actually couldn't really have done it on their own, needed each other.
Freddie had gone to a school school of design. You know, so it was the perfect fusion again. It's like where you've got, you know, this 4 brainy guys, and their music certainly echoed that, and then you've got Freddie, this high camp.
He wanted to open up the bounds. He wanted to combine different things. He wanted to bring them all together into one cohesive thing. He wanted style in music, as he had style in life, I think, as Queen developed style. That was his ambition, style in music.
In 1970, Freddie Mercury, Roger Taylor, and Brian May enlisted bass player Mike Gross, an old friend of Roger's who had played in Reaction. Meanwhile, Freddie came up with a new name for the band.
It was Freddie's idea, and he had the belief in the name. And it had a bit of mystery, had a bit of ambiguity, and it had a bit of regalness. I
asked them what they were going to be called, and Freddie said, Queen. I said, Freddie, you'll never get away with it. It wasn't the first time he proved me wrong. It wasn't the last.
I absolutely thought the name Queen was a fitting name for a rock and roll band because the grandeur, the pomposity that they were trying to bring out, the name fit them great.
And he then told me shortly afterwards that he was going to call himself Freddie Mercury. Having got over the Queen thing, I ran with Mercury, okay.
The name change allowed the budding musician to transform into the star he always knew he could become.
Freddie was great. Everybody used to say, here comes the star. And he acted like a star until he became one. You know, he was going to be like that. Even in the days when he had one T-shirt, one pair of pants, one pair of boots, he was always immaculate. He was always immaculately turned out. He treated himself like a star, and in the end, the whole world treated him like one.
I think you have to be convinced that you're going to be big. Anyone that is big is generally convinced they're going to be. They're not too surprised by it. They always say, I knew it. I knew in here somehow that something was going to happen. And I think you have that inner confidence.
I remember asking him why he never drove, because he couldn't drive. And he said, my dear, he said, I don't need to drive, I'll always be driven.
This was a photo I took of the original Queen lineup with Mike Gross as their bass player. He was not in the band for a great length of time. I don't think the others really felt he gelled with the band.
One night, Roger and Brian were introduced to not only a skillful player and talented songwriter, but to someone who would become a vital part of the Queen magic thereafter. John Richard Deacon was born on August 19, 1951, in Oadby, Leicestershire. He was given his first guitar on his 8th birthday, but eventually he learned bass and joined a band called Opposition a few years later. Like the other members of Queen, John earned high marks in school and went on to attend Chelsea College in London to study electronics. Still harboring aspirations of rock stardom, he kept playing bass in various London bands until he met up with Queen.
I think when John came along, he fitted in very well with Roger's style of drumming. They were really a good backing. It really held the group together and made a good foundation for what was happening in the foreground.
Basically I'm sort of the newest member in a way, because they'd had the band formed for about 6 months with a few other bass players when I came along when I was at college in London. And a lot of ideas from Freddie, I think, in the early days about the way, you know, we should sort of put over the show.
Now with John in the band, Freddie designed a logo for Queen based on their astrological signs: Leo, Cancer, and Virgo. Newly armed with their regal backdrop, the band gigged at every opportunity.
The gigs we did in the beginning weren't all that big, really. There were little theatres in England of something like 1,000 capacity or maybe 2,000. And a lot of those places were very small.
I'd become the social secretary of the college I was at in St Helens in the Northwest. And in a remarkable piece of nepotism, I was booking Queen in for every support slot that I could. We booked them into the college, not once but several times, and we were able to do that because right from the off, the audience really loved the band.
Freddie had problems, I think, at times with his mic, clipping it onto a stand and clipping it off a stand. And eventually they decided, I think, to tape it firmly on to the top of the mic stand so it couldn't fall off, couldn't hit the floor.
One night while playing a show at St. Helens Girls' School, the bottom of Freddie's microphone stand fell off halfway through the show. The consummate professional, Freddie carried on, and a trademark was born.
It became his own little magic wand, I think, to wave over the stage.
The first time I'd seen him using the top half of the mic stand, And I said, "Why are you doing that, Fred?" And he said, "It's my gimmick."
Yeah.
And I said, "Fred, no, not gimmick in this day and age." Fred assured me, he said, "No, my dear, it's a gimmick. You've got to have a gimmick, and this is mine."
He picked up things, as I think any clever entertainer performer does, picked up bits and pieces from all over the place and used it within his stage performance.
He would always make his movements slightly larger than life because he figured that from the back of a big crowd you could only see big poses. Like Mick Jagger is a bit of a scamperer. Freddie kind of went from one pose to another, and I wondered if that was kind of a deliberate thing that he figured out right from the very beginning.
Queen was very different from Smile. Their stage presence was very different. There was movement, there was colour, there was dress sense. Everything was different, really. And in the early days, that stage presence was really what I think began to make them popular. The word was beginning to spread that this really was a good band, a band worth coming to see. And I remember standing at the back of the hall as they were playing and seeing the enthusiasm from everybody around. It was just one of those magic moments, really, where the hairs on the back of your neck begin to stand on end and you just really begin to realise they're going to make it. This is a band of the future.
A friend of Brian's was involved in setting up a new recording studio in Wembley called Delane Lee and offered Queen a much-needed opportunity.
They'd managed to get some recording time at a brand new studio that hadn't yet opened. Engineers were wanting to test out the desks in the 3 studios, and they had several weeks of time there working with the engineers, because the engineers needed to know what the idiosyncrasies of the various rooms was, and to check that all the systems were working correctly. And they needed someone in there to make a noise while they were doing that. And Queen came out of that with a fantastic set of demo tapes.
With a demo tape in hand, Queen began to shop for a record deal.
We certainly had visions. I mean, we thought we were better than anyone else. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But we just didn't know anyone in the business. We didn't have any contacts with any stars.
However, a stream of established production personnel passed through Delane Lee Studios every day, checking out the new facilities. Amongst them were 2 staff engineers from Trident Studios, Roy Thomas Baker and John Anthony. They were impressed with the Queen recordings and persuaded their employers, Barry and Norman Sheffield, to sign the band.
Elton John, Harry Nilsson, David Bowie, and a long list of other notable acts had all used Trident Studios. And it was perceived at that time as being probably the most influential studio in the world.
As Trident worked to negotiate a record deal for Queen, the band began to record songs for their first album during studio downtime. Several months later, in January 1973, the album was completed, yet no record company had agreed to distribute it. Trident then arranged for Queen to do a special recording session for the BBC radio program Sounds of the 70s. It was an opportunity for the band to be heard by millions.
When they came in, you realise that they'd really been thinking about what they wanted to do. Structurally, musically, they wanted to be a bit different from lots of other people.
The positive public response from the show prompted EMI to put the wheels into motion and sign Queen. Elektra Records soon followed to distribute the band's records in North America. The first single, Keep Yourself Alive, was released in July with their debut LP, Queen, quickly following. Finally, the music of Queen was captured on record, yet the single was repeatedly rejected by BBC Radio 1.
Radio 1 had a playlist committee that used to sit in judgment, you know, maybe 6, 7, 8 people. And you could see how sometimes someone would say, well, I really don't like this, and someone would say, no, I'm not too keen on it. And it was a domino effect. Suddenly around the table it would go, and nobody would be keen on it. I think the resistance maybe initially to Queen's first album was that it was different. It wasn't exactly what was happening. And I think that's always a problem. If something comes out that is not what is happening, there is a resistance. In came Queen with a sort of majestic rock. It was a very new thing. I mean, the sort of, you know, early stirrings of stadium rock.
Queen was gaining the respect of many in the music business, and by the end of the year, they had landed a major tour slot as the opening act for Mott the Hoople, a band that was riding high on several hit singles, including All the Young Dudes.
They did a countrywide tour supporting Mott the Hoople Most other bands would be very grateful to do a tour, and if another support tour came along, I'm sure they would have taken it, but Queen said no. You only do one support tour. The next tour has to be our headline tour, and that's what they did.
The head of the promotional department at EMI, Ronnie Fowler, had taken a special liking to Queen and helped them secure a performance on BBC's Top of the Pops. Queen performed a song from their forthcoming album, 7 Seas of Rye. Both the song and the performance were a smash success, and the single rocketed into the top 10, setting the stage for Queen 2 to climb the charts.
I remember the first time I heard Queen, it was 7 Seas of Rye, and it hit me right between the eyes. When I first heard that sort of strident sound on it, I thought, I'd love to have written this song. I love to perform this song. It's still one of my favorite Queen tracks. It's still bright, still stands up today, but I just thought it had everything.
With the success of the single and the growing popularity of the album, Queen embarked on their first headlining tour of the UK.
That was when the second album came out. We actually did a club tour around the whole country, where there were sort of venues that hold sort of 500 upwards to a sort of 1,000, that sort of thing, you know. So they were fairly sort of small gigs, you know. We did a whole tour of that, which sort of really sort of broke the ice in a way. And the show was, you know, built up slowly all the while, you know.
Freddie had an artistic background. He was the one who was into the style, he was into the dress sense, and the others were enthusiastic to go along with it. It was just a beginning, really, with his style, and the others caught on, the others joined in, the others were enthusiastic about it.
The first time I heard from Freddie was when a phone call came out of the blue to my little studio in Porchester Road in Paddington, and I'd never heard of the Queen. I said, well, come round, and it would be best if you come round after work, then we can take the clothes off the rail and you can have a look, because I'd always only made ladies' dresses, so it was quite wonderful to be asked to do something for men. We just tried on different things and held them in front of him, and he sort of like wafted around the room, and he'd like raise his hands and see what it felt like to sing with.
By September, Queen 2 had sold over 100,000 copies. The fan club was growing daily, and the press was taking notice. A single from their forthcoming third album was released a month later, Killer Queen.
It may not have been as apparent with the first couple of albums, but I think with Sheer Heart Attack and beyond that, it started to get apparent just how eclectic the mix of sounds were. And I think that really distinguished them from most groups of that time.
Before the end of 1974, the single Killer Queen climbed to number 2 on the UK charts, taking the album to number 2 as well. Queen negotiated their way out of the Trident deal and struck a management deal with John Reid.
John Reid, who ended up becoming Elton John, well, even then was Elton John's manager. He bankrolled that first big tour they had where they really exploded, because they had all the theatrical effects and everything, you know. But he was the one that gave them the money for that. And he hadn't even planned to be their long-term manager, but he believed in them, and it was like an investment for him and for them, because they were going to disband if that tour hadn't made it. But that tour certainly made it.
John Reid threw a huge party to celebrate his union with Queen.
One thing they were very good at is socializing. They had good parties. I mean, they were fantastic parties. There was a party at the hotel that Freddie was staying at, which was just the most amazing party I think I've ever been to. There were all these strange, wonderful people from all over Europe. I remember one guy with a bird cage with a bird in it on his head. Just amazing people there. I ended up in the pool, which wasn't perhaps the most sensible thing, but anyway. Good party.
After touring the Far East, they entered the studio with producer Roy Thomas Baker to record a Queen album of epic proportions, A Night at the Opera. On one level, the title was a reference to the band's operatic pretensions, evidenced on the classic track Bohemian Rhapsody. But also, with a knowing wink, A Night at the Opera was the title of a classic Marx Brothers movie. Queen presented John Reid with their next single, Bohemian Rhapsody,
It took a long time we did all the instrumental parts first, and they were very bitty, so we had to really do it in sections, and it was quite complicated.
They said at the time, it's too long to be a single, but they've always said that. Back when Mickey most produced the Animals' House of the Rising Sun, people had said, it's 4 minutes long, it will not get played on the radio. A pop record has to be 3 minutes, not 4 minutes. And then, I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody broke all those barriers. Nobody knew what it was about. Nobody understood the lyrics. The time signatures changed. You couldn't dance to it.
They said, oh, no, it's great, fantastic track, lads. But, oh, you have to cut it in half, you know. Singles are 3 minutes long, you know, you can't possibly have that, 6 minutes. So we said, well, sorry, we're not going to cut it. And you either take it as it is or you leave it, you know, you don't have it at all. So they put it out.
Everything was running against it. And yet, it just cut through everything as an amazing track.
We started the year at 9 weeks at #1 in England with an English tour with Bohemian Rhapsody. And so every week it was on top of the pops. And we ended the year, a year later, after playing all around the world. It was a hit all around the world as well.
The Queen machine was now running at breakneck speed. During a short tour of Japan the following year, the UK Top 20 featured all 4 of their albums simultaneously. Soon, EMI were receiving advance orders of over 500,000 for the next Queen album, which borrowed its title from another Marx Brothers film, A Day at the Races. The press made quite a big deal of the repeated Marx Brothers connection. Later that year, as Queen were putting the finishing touches on another album, science fiction fan Brian May decided to locate an artist who drew the cover of an old Astounding Science magazine. A tremendous global seller, News of the World is best known for its opening medley, We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions. Even today, at any sports event in the Western world, those 2 songs are mainstays, a lasting tribute to the strength and staying power of the music. The album tour brought Queen to the US once again, and in December they played the Los Angeles Forum, where they celebrated their remarkable year in typical grand, bombastic style.
So he comes out with the harlequin tights and and a crown, right? And he's got a bottle of Cristal, and this long, beautiful champagne flute. No plastic cup. And he comes out, it's the Forum here in Los Angeles. The place is packed. And he comes and he says, ladies and gentlemen, he says, I want to congratulate you on your good taste of coming to see us. Yeah. Now this is this is really pushy, you know. And I mean, I remember a friend of mine had not seen him before and went, oh, this guy better deliver. Bang on, and then they do. You know, it's almost like those athletes do. And they delivered for about 2 hours, then they just knocked the house down, then dropped rose petals at the end of the damn thing all over the audience and walked off. And you go, shit, you know, that was a great show.
With the Queen machine rolling along, the band issued a string of platinum sellers. News of the World was followed in 1978 by Jazz, another chart topper. Queen continued to tour and release singles and albums. Upon release of the group's 1980 album, The Game, Freddie surprised his fans with his new image and look. Dressed in black leather, short hair, and a mustache, Freddie's less outrageous look adapted to the ever-changing trends and styles of the new decade, the 80s.
When I went to MTV, when I actually flew from LA, and my first night in New York, in a hotel on the Upper East Side, and I walk into the hotel, who's seated at the bar? Freddie Mercury. I had to explain to him what MTV was. Oh, if we can help you, mate, let us know. Well, I think we'll be helping you. We'll see, and that's what happened. Yeah.
We suddenly realised the power of video as a promotional tool was phenomenal. And we said, yeah, this is incredible. This video is doing half the work for us, you know.
Thanks to the success of the singles, Crazy Little Thing Called Love and the dance rock monster, Another One Bites the Dust, The Game rewarded Queen with their first #1 album in the United States. Also in 1980, film producer Dino De Laurentiis commissioned the band to write music for his new movie, Flash Gordon. By the end of the year, Queen had sold over 25 million singles and 45 million albums worldwide. Their concert tours were massive, selling out stadiums throughout South America and Europe.
They had been very successful in some big open-air shows, and the charisma of the band, and particularly Freddie out front, just took that audience into another plane.
I once saw Queen play at Newcastle United's football stadium, and they don't get much tougher than the Geordies of northeast England. And those guys loved him. There was real worship, and this was the era when he would come on dressed as the Queen, you know, with the robes and the crown and holding the mitre, and he'd toss them off and all this stuff. And it was so camp and so showbiz, and yet dressed in that kind of sound of the soundly struck guitars, it was actually also very male, and he had something that really spoke to that audience.
You have a very extrovert stage act by any standards. Will you be able to go on with...
You mean I flaunt it?
You're over the top.
No, because there are certain things that I use in my stage act, which I know automatically I'll get a certain reaction because I know I've been there before.
While recording their next album, Hot Space, in Switzerland, David Bowie stopped by the studio. An impromptu jam ensued and resulted in the new track, Under Pressure, a moving anthem of power and attitude. The single was released prior to the album and went straight to the #1 spot in England. However, Hot Space would mark a turning point in the band's commercial fortunes in America.
Part of why Queen's image in America began to change may have very well had to do with Freddie changing his look. And I think they lost a lot of people because they became more pop and more disco at a time when people were, you know, demolishing disco records in stadiums.
Freddie broke a lot of barriers down. His whole kind of bisexuality came forward on stage. He wasn't fussed about it, that's what he was. He was unbelievably flamboyant. But the UK, the audiences just adored him and loved it, and actually most of Europe. In America, when he kind of outed himself and became quite open about it, a lot of his American audiences did not like it. And I think Elton was doing it around the same time. They actually did themselves a lot of damage. Here, they love it. The more obtuse you are, the better they like it.
A lot of people came to see them, but I think people were a little puzzled with it. They hadn't made their minds up about Freddie Mercury, I don't think. But, you know, the band rocked.
The downward slide continued in the U.S. with the release of The Works in 1984. Faced with their decreased popularity in the U.S. and waning popularity in Britain, Queen fostered their appeal by touring foreign markets, cultivating a large, dedicated fan base in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, continents that most rock groups ignored. In 1985, they returned to popularity in Britain in the wake of their show-stopping performance at Live Aid. It was billed as the Global Jukebox, with artists performing to aid Ethiopian hunger victims.
It was Bob Geldof that announced that Queen were playing before Queen knew about it. And of course, on the day, they turned out to be quite sensational. And they really went out there, lifted up that crowd into a kind of very high echelon above what they were already.
In the case of Queen, they were very happy to go on when they were told to go on. Nobody vied for top spot. They were given by Bob Geldof the running order, and they did what they were told. All those normal rules of rock and roll competition were suspended for the day. But the fact that they were Queen and they'd bothered to come, and like everyone else, they would only sing 20 minutes worth of material, was just fantastic.
The reason probably that Queen stole the show at Live Aid was because they were a genuine stadium band. Freddie and the boys would go out and say, well, this is our sort of crowd, you know. It's what they did. He used the stage. He was a larger-than-life character.
The Live Aid experience rejuvenated the band. Flying high on newfound momentum, the band entered the studio to record One Vision, which rocketed to #7 in the UK and became the theme song for the movie Iron Eagle. Queen then released the music for the feature film Highlander in the shape of their album, A Kind of Magic. The ensuing European Magic Tour played to over 1 million people. In the UK, it seemed, their popularity was unstoppable. Queen released their 16th album, The Miracle, in June of 1989. The album contained music for all moods, its themes dealing with issues of mortality and the indomitable spirit of human beings. Lyrically, it would be a reflective hint of the tragic loss of Freddie Mercury. Queen's recording history reads like a good book, with Innuendo being the final chapter. Its last song, The Show Must Go On, is a fitting tribute to the enduring legacy of Freddie Mercury. By 1991, Queen had drastically scaled back its activity, igniting many rumors about Freddie Mercury's failing health. On November 23rd, he confirmed the worst by issuing a statement that he was stricken with AIDS. He died the next day.
We knew he wasn't well for a while, partly because they didn't tour, you know, and they were a big touring band.
Things leaked into the press and people in the business sort of knew, but I think he was such a popular character and everybody liked him that the press didn't leap on it and go, you know, let this be a warning to you or anything like that, because I think everybody liked him and everyone thought, oh no, you know, it's, you know, what a sad thing to happen.
It was disbelief, really, I think. I wish I'd been more positive about staying in touch with him. I suppose when somebody is that big a star and they're on the TV and they're on videos and they're on records and they're kind of like everywhere, you think they're going to be there forever.
Freddie always had great dignity, and he didn't go about in public at the end and rant and rave and, you know, in Dylan Thomas' words, do not go gentle into that good night. He didn't sort of rant and rage against it. He was very dignified to the end, and I think that that dignity carried on to other people in a similar situation who then thought, well, okay, I too can handle it and be dignified.
When Freddie died, it was just incredible. I think it brought home to us how big and how loved he was around the world, because from every country in the world came these tributes.
I think it's one of the great stories of British rock that the great hero of male machismo rock and roll was gay. Fantastic. There was something about his strength and toughness that made dockers and miners think he was a cool guy. And I think he just had that charisma that you couldn't invent. You know, if you set out to invent Freddie Mercury, you couldn't do it.
Bohemian Rhapsody was re-released with all profits channeled to AIDS research and health education campaigns to stop the further spread of the deadly virus.
I think people started to really take it seriously, you know, and say, well, this, if it can happen to him, it certainly can happen to anyone out there, and that it's not even just a gay disease. I think it brought a lot more light on the subject, which therefore would end up invariably opening up more minds to it, where before it was kind of, well, that's their problem, not mine, and people were BSing themselves. But when you see a major figure like that pass from that, you know, yeah, it certainly stopped us all.
After Freddie left us, I mean, the group still, by and large, stayed together for things here and there.
A memorial concert for Mercury took place at London's Wembley Stadium on April 20th, 1992, featuring an array of superstars including David Bowie and Annie Lennox, Elton John, Guns N' Roses, Def Leppard, George Michael, and actresses Elizabeth Taylor and Liza Minnelli.
We're here tonight to celebrate the life and work and dreams of one Freddie Mercury.
We decided on the night that Freddie died that we would do something which would celebrate his life and the way he was, in a way that wasn't too maudlin and wasn't too sad, but we felt too sad to actually think about what it was at that time. And I think we said when we got ourselves together we would organise something, and this is it.
The tribute to Freddie Mercury was quite a special event. It is quite amazing how many artists really look to Freddie as their hero and as their icon. And it was also an important event because it was one of the very first big worldwide shows that focused on the whole issue of AIDS, which was really kept under the carpet across the world until that point. So for him, it was a befitting tribute. And artists really were just banging on the door saying, we want to be part of it.
It was an amazing day, yeah. Very sad. But they really wanted to do it, and they did it fabulously.
Freddie gave us a wonderful tool in the fact that he announced that he was dying of AIDS rather than saying, you know, it was something else, so that we can use it to promote awareness about AIDS, which now affects everyone, and not enough people realise it. I think we can be a part of people coming to realise that we must unite against this disease.
We feel that we're turning the sort of tragedy of Freddie's passing into some sort of serious goods. It's an event to raise awareness, maybe more than money, you know.
It's quite possible that a chunk of the money that they generated went to develop those drugs, which has saved lots of other people. So that's a nice thought.
This is a very unusual event, really. It's not like your regular concert. But it will be beautiful, and it will not rain, and the heavens will be kind to Freddie. It'll be a perfect day.
The group had never declared that they were officially breaking up, so it was with nervous anticipation that a new Queen album was announced in 1995. Fiercely committed to his artistry until the very end, Freddie's vocals were recorded during his final days.
What we would do would be just make the best use we could of him. You know, that's what he asked. He said, you know, just get me to sing anything you can. You know, write me anything, and I'll sing it, and I'll give you as much material as I can.
Made in Heaven is Queen's swan song, drawing from material Freddie Mercury recorded after their Innuendo album and combining it with new production and recordings by the rest of the band to comprise a final album.
This was a very long and very difficult task. I mean, there was some joy in it because we were able to make something new.
The most telling work on Made in Heaven is the final song that Freddie ever recorded, Mother Love. There is a pain and longing in his voice. He understands that his life is almost over. Made in Heaven is among Queen's most ambitious and challenging works, with Mercury once again proving he was blessed with one of the greatest and most expressive voices in rock.
Queen's legacy, I guess, is the flamboyance of presentation. They were a band that loved to perform. They loved going on the road. They loved to party afterwards.
A girl is gonna pop out of that.
Their fitting tribute is there's just been sold the millionth ticket for the We Will Rock You show. I can't think of a better tribute that 1 million people have gone to see a show about Queen in a theatre.
In 2002, Brian May, John Deacon, and Roger Taylor collaborated with comedian and novelist Ben Elton and financial backer actor Robert De Niro to create a musical featuring Queen's songs. We Will Rock You opened at London's Dominion Theatre early in 2003 to tremendous acclaim.
The songs are all Queen hits. No, there are not new songs in this production. They're all the Queen hits, but they're all restructured, reworked, and that's been part of the joy.
I think Freddie would have absolutely loved it. He was a very theatrical man, and I think he'd be very pleased what we're doing.
It was spectacular.
The best I've ever seen. You could almost feel Freddie.
All the old memories back, absolutely fantastic. It was all about the music, you know, bringing back the memory of Queen. Yeah. You know, you forget what amazing music they created, just wonderful.
The music endures, the music is there, and it's not just been one or two occasional tracks that have been nice to listen to. Over and over and over again, there have been really good pieces of music that you want to play again and again. And I think that's why they have endured. That's why they've found new audiences. It's just, they are just so good with their music. there's still a lot of people around who still love Queen.
And we've gotten through to a lot of people, given a lot of people a lot of enjoyment. And it's something we're proud of, you know.
And if somehow you could be Queen again properly, everyone would be very happy, you know, including us, I'm sure. But it isn't that easy.